Read Me, Part 4 by K.B. HURST. I woke up from a strange dream. In the dream, I was floating on a raft, all alone in the ocean. I looked at my clock as it struck 7 o'clock in the evening. I was never much of an early evening napper until recently. I think it is safe to say that it has everything to do with this damn book. I admit, I loved my gifts, new skills, technological, a gift of thunder, and even music. What else awaited me? It had been a few days since the incident with the clowns. I was secretly hoping nothing else from that book seeped into my reality. I sat up as my telephone rang. Looking at the caller ID, I recognized it as my friend Julia.
Robert, how are you?
Very well. How have you been?
Oh, I think I caught some flu while I was in Brazil.
Brazil?
Yes, I made it to South America. I'm in Miami now. I'm resting in a posh hotel. So, anything new? She asked in her deep southern way.
Oh, well, I recently took up the piano.
Oh, how very intellectual of you.
I know, who would have thought I could teach an old dog new tricks?
Are you sure that's the only reason?
What other reason could there be, except a capacity to learn?
Did you put anything in that book yet? She asked me seriously.
What do you mean?
Did you write anything down?
Well, not exactly. She snickered into the phone.
Robert, the keeper of secrets. Listen, I'll be in town to see you by the end of next week. There's something vital I want to discuss with you.
Of course, I'm looking forward to seeing you. With that, I hung up the phone. Suddenly, I heard a loud knocking sound. It sounded as though someone was banging a steel drum as loudly as they could. I looked around my living room. You would think that after all I had been through, I would be used to strange sounds by now. However, it never ceased to perplex me. I saw a dim light coming from my bookshelf. The sound became louder as I got closer to it. The Read Me book jumped off the shelf and plummeted itself into my chest, nearly knocking me over. "Hell!" I yelled. I rubbed my chest, as it was quite sore from the blow. I sat on my sofa and placed the book on my lap, and it opened up to me. Pages flipped past 100 at a time, finally settling on a blank page that began to come to life. It was a large brick building with black windows. The old building was sprawled out in the middle of that small town and seemed to tower above the residents like an angel of death. There was a field surrounding it, and I could make out the words on the building's front. Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. I saw the chapter illuminate on the page in the bright, fiery light. I was the youngest resident of the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. I read on, out loud to myself, as my voice changed into that of a young child. The year, 1932. It was a perfect fall day on the day that I was born. I was a perfect baby, 10 fingers, 10 toes, all in place, 6 pounds and 5 ounces, a gorgeous, preserved baby boy. The circumstances to which I were born were not perfect, however. My mother was placed in the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum by my father. He claimed she had been challenging to live with because of bouts of melancholy. He claimed she barely talked to him anymore and continuously made life difficult when he would take her in public. She would act strangely, pretending not to know him or pretend she was other people. It was all lies, of course. My father had been having an affair with his secretary, and he didn't want a wife or a child to come between him and his mistress. I was allowed to stay with my mother for the first few weeks at the asylum, but then I had to be put in a ward where I would have 24-hour care. I was the first child to have been born at the Liberty Hill Lunatic Asylum. There were other children, but they were pubescent. Most were wards of the state of West Virginia, which meant they would be taken care of financially for the rest of their lives, regardless of age or social status. Instead, I was cared for by multiple staff and a few patients that were good with children. One such woman, whom I would consider my true mother figure, after mine so unfortunately hung herself with her twisted bed linens. She was found hanging from the rafters in the laundry room. Izzy took to me immediately. They said she had children of her own years before me, but her husband had taken them and moved away. She was committed and never saw them again. So what can I say about Izzy? Her first name, Isabel. Last name is nearly forgotten except the one time she shared it with me. It was Martin. Isabel Martin had become a number 852314 by the hospital records. The staff treated all the patients as though they were items or things to be studied. The newest medication, some off-the-wall concoction, was given to the patient that fit the worst symptom. Most were barbaric by later standards of practice. Izzy kept to herself when she wasn't required to have meals with the other women in her ward. She helped care for me each day, changing my diapers, combing my baby fine hair, and when I was older, she taught me manners, such as how to eat with a fork, cut with a knife, and not slurp your soup like a slob. They built a playground that had to be fenced in so that the criminally insane patients could not get in and cause damage to it. It consisted of a second-hand swing handed down from the local elementary school after they put in a brand new one. It also had a small slide and an area to play hopscotch. It was okay for the most part, but being the only child under 10 years of age proved to be rather lonely. I had my room filled with old toys, dolls, and a tiny bed for my slim frame to sleep in. No matter what, I always had Izzy, so she would play with me on the swing and indulge in my constant enthusiasm for army guys. Then one afternoon something changed. We had a new head nurse in charge of the ward I was in, Mrs. Whitehead. She was a stern advocate for cost saving at the facility so that more patients could be admitted. Seeing as how I was the only child under 6, I was placed in a new room, 8 by 10. It only allowed me one doll, and so I took my little toy soldier named Captain Brian. My room was at the end of a long hallway that was gloomy at best. There was a lock placed on the outside of my door. It wasn't so I wouldn't escape. No one else except hospital staff could get in. Long before they added to the building with the lobotomy ward, the criminally insane ward, and the ward for drug addicts, it was common practice to place you basically where they had room for you. It was how my nightmare began. I was never placed up for adoption, even though I was a ward of the state, and instead I was kept at the hospital. I had teachers that taught me what I needed, and later I did attend a regular school, but for the first 10 years of my life, I remained inside the halls of Liberty Hall Lunatic Asylum. My first night in my new quarters was very quiet. The second night, that's when my horror began. I woke in the middle of the night to whispering coming from outside my metal screen door. I see you. I could not see him. It was most surely a man's voice, but in the dark, it was very, very dark at night, except for the nurse's station, which had a little dim lamp on the desk where the nurse in charge sat, in the middle of the hall, to keep an eye on the patients. Who's there? I answered, putting Captain Brian at the foot of my bed, waiting on him to charge whoever was at my door.
A demon.
Mr. Andrews, I heard the head nurse charging down the hallway. Please return to your room.
I want to see the new pet, he said.
How on earth did you get out?
The dead man did it.
I was growing terrified. Enough nonsense. Now go lay down, and I'll fetch your favorite pillow, she said in a mockingly kind voice. I heard the door next to mine slam, and a jangling of keys. Then I heard her walk away, back down the hallway. I had a hard time sleeping after that. As time wore on, I began to get used to my neighbor's antics and realized he was relatively harmless. There were others, however, I learned to avoid in that long hallway. There was a man named Big Red. He was a tall man, who I later discovered was a boxer. He had killed 3 men in a bar fight one night. All night, every night since his admittance, I would hear him hitting the steel door over and over and over again. It never seemed to cease, except when I was taken out for school, bath time, or meals. All night, the banging never ended. Mr. Anders began to yell one night over the banging. He cursed and said things I would never imagine anyone that was God-fearing would say. He had grown much more agitated as time went on. Big Red continued his assault on the metal door, as though he were a caged animal. He usually ignored me after that first night when he saw me. He wasn't protective exactly, but Mr. Andrews would tell other patients his pet had to sleep. It creeped me out all the time, but I think Mr. Andrews took a liking to me in his way. I was no longer afraid of him, really. Izzy came to get me one afternoon for a cooking lesson. I recall it was close to the holiday coming up. She had obtained permission from one of the nurses to teach me how to bake sugar cookies with her. I helped her and 2 of the other nurses who joined us roll out the dough and shape it using the star cutouts she had given me. We decided to take a few dozen for the other patients, and in doing so, I had an unfortunate accident. I had seen Izzy taking out the tray of cookies with a giant rag, but not realizing the oven was hot, I tried to help her after the second batch. I opened the stove myself before anyone could stop me, grabbing the hot tray with my hands. I held it for far too long before realizing the absolute horrifying pain and dropping the scalding tray of cookies on the kitchen floor. I screamed bloody murders. I had cried so loud that both nurses and Izzy rushed to my aid to help me. I wouldn't stop crying no matter what they did to help me with the pain. My hands were both burnt very severely. My skin was coming off, and to this day, I don't know what possessed me to hold on to the tray as long as I did. It was like I didn't know what heat or even what pain was. I was bandaged, sedated, and put to bed. When Mr. Andrews saw me in my bandages, he got very agitated. My pet! Who hurt the pet? Mr. Andrews, calm down or we'll have to shut your door, said one of the nurses. Greta, perhaps you should anyway. He's had enough downtime for today. I'll get him to bed. But the nurse didn't have time. Instead, Mr. Andrews followed the 2 nurses to my door and saw Izzy crying. It's all my fault. I'm so sorry. Mr. Andrews lurched forward, unexpectedly, hitting Izzy in the head as hard as he could, knocking her into the wall of my room. Izzy was now unconscious, and Mr. Andrews was screaming, My pet! My pet! My pet! It took 2 nurses, 3 orderlies, and 1 doctor to sedate Mr. Andrews. That was the last time I got to see Izzy. I didn't know what happened to her, if she were alive, dead, or in a coma. I was reading the words on the page when I heard a knock at my door. I snapped out of my storyteller mode. I sat the read-me book on the coffee table and went to answer the door. "Hello, are you Robert Zephyr?" An older man stood at my door. He was tall, wore a black raincoat and a black fedora. Yes, who wants to know?" "My name is Edmund. I have come to speak with you about a crucial matter." I opened my door, letting the older man in. Please, sit down," I said. "Oh, thank you. This will not take long." "Very well. Could I offer you a drink?" "Oh, a cup of coffee if you have one. It's quite a chilly day." The old man smiled. "Of course," I said, making my way into the kitchen to fix a pot of coffee. "So, tell me, Mr. Zephyr, how long have you known Julia Spellman?" Years. Julia was a colleague of mine when I did theater." I called back from the kitchen. "I believe she's acquainted with a very, very good friend of mine." "Oh?" I finally asked, seeing the pot of coffee rush through, making a quick pot. I'd only put together enough for 2 cups. No point wasting an entire pot of coffee on some stranger who was only going to stay maybe a few minutes. "Yes, Isabel Martin." I froze. What the hell? I quietly grabbed the cups of coffee and took them into my living room. Edmund Wright was sitting up tall with a pleasant grin on his face. "I'm afraid I have no idea who Julia's other friendships are, who she's involved with. I'm not really sure how I can help you." "Well, I figured that might be the case," he said, sipping the coffee and sitting back against my couch. "See, young man, I think she may be in danger, if I may be so blunt." "Danger?" I asked, puzzled. Yeah, she took something of value to a very close friend of mine." "What did she take?" I could not imagine Julia as a thief, but she had said she wanted to talk to me about something vital. I kept that part to myself. "You see, it was an item that was sold to her. You see, a very grave mistake was made. She was sold something that was not for sale. I was wondering if I may get in contact with her. Some very dangerous people are looking for her now." I can pass on a message. I don't see her often, however." I lied in an attempt to protect my friend in case she was in danger. This man knew something. I thought it was bizarre. He mentioned the name of the woman from the Read Me story. This was becoming too surreal. "Well, thank you very much." Edmund stood, handing me his coffee cup. "Is there a way to contact you?" I asked. She'll know. Tell her my name. Thank you for the coffee, and I'm so sorry I came to you with this grave message. Please forgive the intrusion." With that, I let Edmund Wright out of my house. I tried to call Julia on my cell phone, but all I got was her voicemail. I walked over to the sofa and I sat down. I looked at the coffee table where I had left the book. It was now gone.